voice of our forefathers sings. The will to live will be done. We will no longer be pawns to greed and to war. We will be idle no more. And we will stand for the right to be free. And we will rebuild a just society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. And we will stand for the right to be free. And we will rebuild a just society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. When the ancient drum rhythms ring, the voice of our grandmother sings. Native America run, we will no longer succumb to oil and to ore. We will be idle no more. And we will stand for the right to be free. And we will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. And we will teach about the right to be free. And we will rebuild our own society. We will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. Oh, dance, dance for the right to be free. We will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. One man, one way, and occupy for the right to be free. And we will rebuild a just society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song.
What a great slideshow. So inspiring and brings up so many memories, I'm sure, for so many people on this call. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I apologize for a little bit of weird technical issues with that audio, but we will make sure that I think at some point folks will be able to see those pictures up on the website. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. I've been so excited about this night. I've been really looking forward to all of us getting together and just looking at reflecting on all these accomplishments. We do want to begin this evening with a land acknowledgement. We recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Native people and their traditional territories, and we respectfully acknowledge the lands we live and work on rest on the traditional lands of Native people who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial and continue to do so today. Again, thank you all for being here this evening. We've got a great lineup of panelists tonight. This is the first ever public screening of Necessity Part 2, Rails, Rivers, and the Thin Green Line. I know a lot of you have already seen the film. I hope most of you have, but if you haven't seen it yet, don't worry. It's still going to be available for a little while after tonight, so folks can still hop on and see the film or watch it again if you're just really wanting to feel really inspired. You can just use that same link and password that you got in your email. Like I said, I'm just so excited for tonight. This film is just such an inspiring representation of the power when people come together to protect what we love. I'll start by saying my name is Kate Murphy, she, her pronouns. I'm the community organizer with Columbia Riverkeeper based out of Portland, Oregon. And I have the pleasure of being your moderator tonight. And I'm just so pleased to be with all of you. This is a really powerful, inspiring panel. And I feel like storytelling is such an important aspect of the work that we all do. I'm really honored to be sharing this space with all of you tonight, and those of you who are here with us. I feel like I have a really personal connection to this story, and really want to thank all of the panelists and everyone who worked so hard to contribute to bringing this film to life, for sharing your stories with us, and for really being a shining example of how to show up for others in this fight. So thank you also to everyone who's joining us tonight, and to those of you who couldn't make it but have contributed in other ways to making this possible. The money raised from this fundraiser will go to support the Necessity film series, as well as Columbia Riverkeeper's work. So we really appreciate all the contributions that have already come in, all your generosity to move this work forward. And for those folks who are feeling inspired and haven't had a chance yet, I'll make sure to be putting the donation link in the chat throughout the evening. With that, I do want to jump right in because we have such a great panel tonight. We're going to hear from each of the panelists, and then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for a question and answer session. So keep in mind your questions as we kind of like go through the panelists, and have them ready to put in the chat during the Q&A so that you can ask them directly. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker this evening. Our first speaker is Cathy Sampson-Kruse. Cathy is of the Waluulapum band of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and it was an associate producer of this Necessity film, is also featured in the film, and has just been played a critical role. Cathy's joining us by phone tonight because she is in an area where the Wi-Fi is a little questionable. We're really excited to have Cathy here. Cathy is also a board member with Columbia Riverkeeper, and has been a total champion of the Thin Green Line movement. Cathy, thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you have so much experience to share with us, and we're so pleased to have you here tonight. And with that, I will pass it to you, Cathy.
Sheikh Pachwe, good evening. It's just so wonderful to see this panelists of wonderful women, strong women. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that's listening and watching the development over many years that Jan and her team has been able to capture on film. So thank you for joining us tonight as we look to the many happenings and celebrations around Native American Heritage Month. You know, I'm just in awe. I'm in awe of the uprising in all our treaty people who are protecting our land, air, and water around our homelands. So a big thank you to everyone. We'll pass it on, Kate.
Kate, you're on mute.
I'm muted. It never fails. Cathy, I'm gonna introduce each panelist before they speak. So if you have anything else you want to share with us, I'd love to invite you to speak more about your experience fighting these fights and how you came to be involved in the Necessity film, and kind of your unique perspective there.
Well, okay then. Boy, where do I begin? I mean, first, it's always a thank you. It's a thank you to my family, who's always follows up on those moccasin telegraphs that we send out to get the word out, to support direct actions or lobbying our leaders, tribal or state or federal, being those moccasins on the ground. I can remember when Jan first approached me at the rally at Vancouver, at the oil terminal rally. And my first reaction was, I don't know. Then we had another call, and then we got together for coffee. Hand me some Java. I can talk to anybody with a cup in my hand. And then I saw the vision, and I saw where she was going, and to really get Native voices and the actions that we have done with our allies, it is really amazing. I can recall taking a film class so many years ago at Portland State University, probably the 80s. And we were in the middle of a hearing about hearing about the apartheid movement in South Africa. And those films, those discussion groups, they led to us young people having a rally and a march and a divestment movement that happened around the globe, and we just all kind of were so thankful when Nelson Mandela was freed and people were lining up to vote for the first time. Those films and discussion groups were amazing. And I truly believe that education is the key to changing the tides of denial around climate change. This film series will be a key to making that happen for our young people. I know Jan has backing from the Zin Education Project and our own Nishnawbe Tribal Charter School at home on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We'll be showing it in December to the high school. So we need to continue to plant the seeds of resistance to corporate greed that seems so powerful, but the power of the people is stronger, and we will continue to rise up. I know we will. So I have more to say. I mean, you could get me started on small modular nuclear reactors. You can get me started on that darn Carty Boardman frac plant that PGE is trying to do. Zenith, there's so many things that we need to, keep focused on. But that power of the people is what's most important to me. And I want to say a big shout out to my granddaughter, Juniper. How so much, babe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. We really appreciate you. I am putting a few links in the chat right now for folks to see. It's inspiring. You've had just a lifetime of dedication that you've lived, protecting the planet and others. So it's wonderful to have you here to share your unique perspective with us, and your dedication and your experience and your wisdom truly benefit all of us, Cathy. So thank you. And thank you also for raising that issue on the Carty generating station. If folks are feeling like, I really want to do something tonight, what can I do? There's a quick and easy petition that you can sign for that to stop PGE's request for more harmful pollution. It's a serious environmental justice issue that we have until December 17th to submit comments, and we really do feel like together this is a harm that we can reduce and prevent for communities that are already overburdened in the Columbia River Gorge. So thank you, Cathy, for raising that. Those links are in the chat for folks. And I want to introduce our next guest. Our next guest is Jan Haaken. Jan is a professor emeritus of psychology and is a documentary filmmaker who, along with others, has brought us this Necessity film series that we are all discussing and have had the pleasure of watching. And I was able to work together with Jan on organizing this screening, and I am so happy to be here tonight, Jan, with you, to invite you to share more about your story. And we'd love to hear, from you some background about how you were inspired to make these films and kind of how you decided to go about making the sequel, Necessity Part 2, Braille's Rivers and the Thin Green Line.
Well, thank you, Kate. And thanks to all the staff at Columbia Riverkeeper and for not only this event, but partnering with us throughout the project. There were some creative and technical challenges as we filmed during the pandemic. And Dan Sear stepped in and helped us figure out a way to do interviews in compliance with the production guidelines by the state of Oregon, which we did comply with. But we continued on, and thanks to all of you. And we have, I think, a special affinity with Columbia River Keeper, because you are a form of social memory in a way, holding together both the victories and the ongoing struggles we share in confronting industries that threaten our survival and the health of our communities. So there's that balance of both ongoing struggles, the role of activism, but also recognizing and honoring our victories and the people on the front lines of this movement for climate justice. So this is a special night. It is, as you said, our first public screening of this film, and many people have been involved. I often tell my students, sit through the credits. Don't just leave when the film ends, because all these people and organizations have been vital in carrying this forward and need to be honored and recognized, not just the director. But in terms of directors, I want to recognize tonight my co-director, Samantha Krause, who's actually, this is, she joined my documentary teams at Portland State 4 films ago, 8 years ago. And along with other students, joined the research teams. All of the films have research teams and students involved in various production roles and learning about participatory methods, non-extractive storytelling, as we call it, that involve deep collaborations with the communities and people featured in the films. So I'm so grateful to have her ongoing work, as well as other students who've been involved in the project. I also, in addition to Cathy, who you just heard, who's been a guiding force throughout this project, is both a featured subject in the film, but also an associate producer, but also associate producer Hanani Kalama, who's been in the project throughout, and our very gifted editor, Emily W. Von Gilbert, who, as I'm sure many of you know, documentaries are created in the editing as well as in the process of following a story. So I want to recognize her, and also all of the videographers, filmmakers, artists, tribal leaders who've contributed footage to this, because obviously we can't be all places at all times. So you depend in a project like this on not only following events yourself as a crew and interviewing participants, but the contributions of the many filmmakers and videographers at different junctures in the process. In terms of my own history, my documentary work came out of my field research at Portland State, and much of it over the last 20 years has focused on crisis zones, settings where people are doing very difficult work in response to a conflict of some kind or a crisis of some kind. And I've been very interested as a psychologist too, in how people carry a very difficult and often carry out difficult and controversial work. And certainly movement lawyers, tribal leaders, climate justice activists are doing a kind of social labor, a kind of cultural work that is often not recognized, particularly as civil disobedience and direct action becomes often, it's crudely represented in the media, and the thought and care and commitment behind this work is generally not understood, including among many of my students who came into these projects, had little sense of the history of civil disobedience, how almost any social movement that we value that's contributed to progress has involved courageous acts of civil disobedience, and with the support of communities confronting destructive and repressive forces of some kind. So that has been an important part of this project for me as an educator as well as an activist. And I've also been very interested and engaged in how young people are understanding the climate crisis and the scope of it, of the horror they confront. And I know some adults and parents say, well, kids should be protected from the scale of this crisis, the climate emergency. But of course, many communities, indigenous communities, have not had that protection, have had to confront it for a long time, and have learned practices of resilience and resistance that have much to teach others who have been able to keep somewhat of a safe distance until now from the scope of the crisis. So those lessons have been important to bring into view. And I think a lot of young people who saw Necessity Part 1 really encouraged us to continue and tell this story, follow the story of the use of the necessity defense and other legal strategies, the role of tribal and Native leadership in the climate movement in other regions. So we were encouraged to stay with this project with Part 2. Of course, films, whether they're fiction or narrative films, are supposed to offer a satisfying denouement at the end, you know, a happy ending. Of course, this has no happy ending. So for us as a film team, we struggle with how do you give the audience some of what they look for in a film. And here in Part 2, there is a kind of gratifying denouement that we were looking for, but it's an ongoing struggle. We know that. So as a psychologist and an educator and a filmmaker, I was very interested in how people struggle, what they learn through struggle, how you develop alliances and forms of allyship in continuing and finding, as Tara Haskins has said, beauty and meaning in struggle. So that there is a process of coming together that is gratifying. And I also think a film, even an educational film like this, should be aesthetically satisfying to watch as well as informative. So I hope people have found it a gratifying film to watch as well as informative, and will inspire ongoing activism. And I'm so happy to be part of this panel tonight with many of the featured participants in the film, and this film itself is a way of paying tribute to their work, and hopefully in a way that does justice to it and won't be the last of it in the series. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for all of your work on this. And this film is so important for, and many other films. Film itself is so important for being able to shed light on issues that might not otherwise have the same kind of reach. I heard you mention the term social labor, and I think that's really powerful, a concept that I think resonates with a lot of folks. And there are so many dedicated activists and community members who are putting themselves on the line and fighting these critical fights every day, and they don't get this kind of exposure. So to be able to share these stories in a way that allows people to connect and see for themselves is just such a source of motivation and also of education. And I think that seeing these fights happening that we relate to in other places builds such a strong sense of camaraderie. I know it does for me. It's like so inspiring and motivating to see these fights happening simultaneously, like all of these different fights around, and being able to capture that in a poignant film that tells an important story is really a critical part of that. So thank you so much. And again, for folks who want to support this type of work, that donation link can be found in the chat. But yes, thank you for Jan and everyone else for providing such a valuable resource for our movement. Next, I want to move to introduce Direlle Calica. Direlle is a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and is director at the Institute of Tribal Government at Portland State University. Direlle, as with every panelist, I just want to say as the caveat, like all these bios seem so abbreviated. I could spend the whole webinar giving bios on all these amazing women on the panel tonight. So Direlle, we're so pleased you can join us this evening and share some of the wisdom from your lifetime of experience, also fighting to protect communities and the planet. So thank you, Direlle, and we'd love to hear also like more about how you became involved in this film.
Well, thank you all, and thanks to everybody that's joining us this evening. It's such a beautiful day and evening. I drove over from Central Oregon late this afternoon and got to kind of experience the beauty of our state, from Warm Springs to the high Cascades, and making it over here to the Willamette Valley safely, then starting to snow on the passes. So, but you know, it was a good reminder as I was thinking about this evening and this project. And it's been a while. I know that Jan and the team have been wanting to pull off this sort of public rollout, and kind of, you know, having to roll with the public health pandemic, all sorts of things that are going on in our world. And, you know, it makes me think about, you know, sort of the question you posed to Cathy, and the question you pose now is how I became a part. First of all, short answer, it's Cathy's fault that I got connected with this and connected me with Jan. But anyway, the process and this project. So I was excited to do so. But I think part of that invitation, and Cathy is my relative in full transparency. And so I just wanted to say, I saw your boys today. So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement as well, that, you know, we are family, whether we're, you know, related or we are living and occupying the same space and territories, and we are all neighbors. And I think about this, so, you know, thinking about family has been sort of that anchor, because family's my first set of teachers when I'm born. And so my parents played a really important role. Both of them were also educators, and my father later would go on to be our general manager for natural resources, and later move up into tribal leadership and eventually tribal council. And so a lot of that exposure early on was sort of a given that education was going to play a role in my life. The expectation that I would go to college. I'm not a first generation college. Both my parents went to college. So I get kind of that benefit of having that legacy to fall back on, and to have sort of that mentoring from my parents. And so that's one of those things. But then I also think about sort of that cradle that surrounds us, which is the environment, those resources, and especially thinking about water is one of those. And that's my profile pic, is just that, is kind of the work that we're doing in our tribal communities around educating our communities, our people, and our leaders about water from a whole system perspective, not just tribal water rights, but from everything from public health to how it affects our communities, things that we can do on our own water footprint. And so just kind of thinking about those lands and the stewardship that we take care of those, and realizing that a lot of this work is so intergenerational, that as Indigenous people, our worldview is a very long worldview in terms of things, that we spend a very short time here on this earth in these bodies, and that it's what we do with that time, and that we share these resources with each other, but we're also borrowing them from our next generation, our children and grandchildren. And so that's something that's really important. I don't take that at all as rhetoric to me. That those are core principles of who I am. Those were carried through in our songs and traditions and our unwritten laws. And so all of that imparts on me a sense of duty and stewardship. I mean, you offered the land acknowledgement at the beginning, and I think those are important words, but they're also a responsibility that we all have to these resources that we share in common. And I think I heard somebody mention gratitude. And that's just such an anchoring piece. And as Jan was talking about, the psychology of these really heavy issues and the resilience we have in our tribal communities. We were just talking yesterday about pandemics in the last pandemic. And I recall, on Memorial Day, we were going around and some of our elders were pointing out different graves that had multiple family members in there because they couldn't dig graves fast enough. So this is still, something we keep in our memory and psyche about the last pandemic. And so you kind of think about that intergenerational stewardship and responsibility to take care of each other. And sort of in the face of these challenging things, there's also a chance to take inventory of things to be grateful for. Because it's easy to throw up your hands and say, oh, this is hopeless. And it's not. It's not, because I look back and I think I have this gratitude towards my ancestors who forged ahead and who took care and did what they could for my arrival. And it's my obligation to do the same for the next generation of people coming up behind me. And so I have a level of gratitude about that responsibility that it's not something I have to do, it's something that I get to do. And so kind of thinking about that. And then I just kind of, as an attorney, thinking about, and a policy person and working in the space of government and governance, and really where tribes intersect with governments and governing. And that sort of inherent intersection between all these kind of core principles that I just mentioned, and how we carry that forward in the way in which we govern and live with each other in our tribal communities, but how that extends outward. And the word that kind of came to my mind was the advent of consultation and consultation with tribes. And it's a very loaded term, but I think about the fact that consultation really has not been something that's really been implemented by government agencies or in the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. That notion of consultation, had it been around, and our Indigenous understanding of our and our worldview, our understanding of science, tribal ecological knowledge would have been valued earlier, maybe things would be a little different. But we can't go back in a time machine and do that. But at the same time, we are at a really important place where we can instill, I guess, some sense of hope and gratitude about what can we do going forward. And so some of that does come with challenges, but I guess part of that is that sense of hope and gratitude about what do I get to do today? And this feeling of, some of it may, to me, and my measurement of it may be small, but I feel like some of the impacts are big when I'm taking some of our young students out to, show them the sort of hydrologic cycle here in just the Willamette Valley. And they don't have that understanding, but they walk away from it. And I don't know what they do with that knowledge, but I know many of them are going to college now. And so it's just kind of planting a lot of those seeds and seeing how they propagate. And so, being a part of this project was great in terms of the fact that my education led me to working on environmental work, working in energy, and sort of that nexus between all those things that I care deeply about is, I think, why I landed here in this project and here with all of you this evening. So that's my brief thoughts for the night.
Direlle, thank you so much for sharing with us. And we're so glad you were able to make it back safely to join us tonight. I think you mentioned a lot of really poignant things. Our work is all so connected. And the things that we are connected to, the things you mentioned, like family and our educators, the things we hold dear, our environment, these are such powerful motivators that connect us to each other and move us, move people to protect one another and reduce harm. So the tribes of since time immemorial played such a significant leadership role in modeling how to care for one another and for our planet, and in so many of these fights. And we're so appreciative of that leadership. I think, you know, the gratitude you talked about is so critical. And I think for all of us who have shown up repeatedly on behalf of one another, we understand that, what that feeling of gratitude that gets cultivated does. And it almost feels like sometimes I feel like I'm getting more out of something than it took to participate. You know, it's just so, it's so important, and it's so rewarding, and it's you know, being able to show up for those that we hold dear, but also those that are far away is just really powerful. And I think this storytelling is a great way to weave those things together. So thank you, Direlle, for sharing. And I'm just all emotional about the whole thing right now. And I'm gonna introduce our next guest, Lauren Regan, who is another key contributor to this film and is featured in the film, and is been really critical to the strategic success of a lot of campaigns to protect the planet. Lauren is the executive director and senior staff attorney with Civil Liberties Defense Center, who many of us are familiar with, and we thank you for your work there. Lauren is just a national expert in defense of activists, and particularly those engaged in climate and environmental and Indigenous and animal rights movements. So we're so pleased to have you with us, Lauren, to share more about your involvement in kind of a lot of the core of what this film is about, and also just, you know, how you kind of got involved in the film. And I'll pass to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And thanks everybody for having me tonight. It is definitely a privilege to be bookended by Jan and Cathy, who are both past clients of mine and people that I consider friends in the work that we're all doing. So for me, I started the CLDC 18 years ago. And in that time period, we've represented close to 5,000 activists for free. And a lot of them are environmental and animal rights and Indigenous sovereignty and anti-fascist and, you know, basically any struggle that's left of center, we've probably been a part of. And from very early days, I had started using the necessity defense for forest defenders. I also did environmental law. And so when I would file an environmental case to like stop a timber sale, and then the timber sale litigation wasn't successful and the areas were being threatened with logging, my clients would show up and put their bodies between the chainsaws and the trees and would get themselves arrested. And so we started using the necessity defense in those cases, basically saying like we had exhausted all legal means to stop this irreparable harm. And when the system failed the public interest, then the people were able to basically put their bodies in the way of harm and risk their liberty. And we, you know, at that point decided they defended, you know, they needed the best defense possible. And we started doing that work. And so fast forward, you know, 10 or 15 more years, in all of that time, basically the courts were refusing to let us use the necessity defense. And it was kind of bittersweet when we first had a Minnesota court during the Valve Turner cases, which were individuals that turned safety valves at tar sands pipeline that basically stopped all of the tar sands oil coming from Canada into the US for a day. And in those cases, in that Minnesota case, that was the first court that actually granted us the full-blown necessity defense. And the state of Minnesota appealed it, And ultimately, the appellate courts ruled that we got to do the necessity defense. And so, ironically, we got experts together. We had, some of the world's leaders on science and policy and all of those things. And at the close of the state's case, lawyers normally make what's called a motion for judgment of acquittal, which basically means that the state didn't prove their case and the judge should dismiss it before the defense even has to go. And for the first time in my 24-year legal career, a court granted our motion and dismissed all of these felony charges against valve turners, which was an awesome victory to be charged with multiple felonies and to turn valves on camera and be able to walk away with it with a total victory. But it also meant that we didn't get to put on that full-blown necessity defense that we had anticipated. And so it was with the XR Portland case that was featured in the documentary, where the court allowed us to put on that necessity defense. And it was actually the first time in the history of the United States that the climate necessity defense was allowed to go to a jury, that the jury was literally given a jury instruction to apply the necessity defense to the case. And then, as you saw, ultimately, again, we had individuals engaged in direct action for the climate on camera that utilized a necessity defense and walked away with no convictions at all. To me, the most important part of that experience, whenever we use necessity defenses or attempt to in a courtroom, we are able to talk with jurors. We are able to talk with people in the community that we might not otherwise have access to. And we're able to sort of do it in this microcosm of a courtroom, meaning everybody is really focused on the testimony and the strength of your evidence or the strength of your position is really scrutinized by these jurors who are literally weighing this necessity defense. And to have those jurors come back, 5 out of 6 of them say that at this point in time, they believed that sitting on railroad tracks, stopping bomb trains, doing whatever we can to try to resist the corporate greed within the fossil fuel industry, that tipped the scales in favor of direct action versus this law and order mentality of whether something is technically a crime or a conviction or not. So it's our great privilege and honor to be able to help in the defense of these cases and to really raise up the political aspects of engaging in direct action. And just kind of a shout out to Kenneth Krischer, who was one of our co-counsels in that case, and Cooper Brinson, who was also involved in the case. It's never a single individual that pushes, these types of actions, these types of defenses. It's always going to be a mass movement that will be responsible for any gains that we make in the struggle. So, yeah, I guess that's where we come from in this story.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Honestly, I get goosebumps when I see you doing your thing in the courtroom. Once again, it's just a great example of successful strategic collaboration and really highlights the value of utilizing all the tools we have in our toolbox in the most strategic and effective way. And I think you've been really key in your work it continues to, I think, motivate folks to have the courage to speak up and put themselves on the line. We get, this growing up, it was like getting arrested is bad and getting arrested is bad. And, you've really empowered folks to know their rights and know what they are empowered to do and how they're empowered to stand up and protect themselves and one another. And Jan's ability to put that into the package of a film so that that can be shared out as an educational tool and people can understand that there are strategic pathways available for folks, everyday folks who wouldn't even necessarily expect themselves to be in that situation, but they feel a really driving force to stand up and do what's right. So thank you, Lauren, for your work and for being here tonight and sharing with us. And with that, I want to transition over to our final speaker, Jan Zuckerman. And after this, we'll have a Q&A session, so stick around, everyone. But Jan is a local activist, a retired teacher, founder of the Sunnyside Environmental School, and another tireless activist who I've also had the pleasure of working alongside. And I'm so excited, Jan, that you're here tonight with us too. We're so happy to hear from you and want to hear more about your story and the work that you do and how you wound up being part of this necessity film. So I will pass to you, Jan. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And thank you all. I feel so humbled, honestly, to be on this panel with you all. And I'm nervous, so. 2 years ago, I was preparing for the trial for building the Victory Garden at Zenith Energy to stop the oil trains when my granddaughter Petra was born. And now with that this film is released, my second grandbaby is going to be born any day now. And unfortunately, though, the trains are still coming. The facility at Zenith has expanded and continues to operate. But I do have hope that the only existing oil by rail facility in the Northwest can be stopped because of land use violations, something that would have never happened without the blood, sweat, and tears and persistence on the part of our community and the lessons we've learned from those fighting this battle upstream. I was asked to share my perspective as an activist. And I just looked up the word activist. I looked up a synonym for activists, and there's, dozens and dozens: warrior, advocate, agitator, rebel, mover and shaker, enthusiast. I like that one. And the list goes on and on, but what's missing is teacher. And Gordon Parks was born in 1912, and he was the first Black photographer that was hired by Life magazine. He was a humanitarian and an activist, and he said, photography was my choice of weapon. Well, my choice of weapon is teaching, it's education. And I was fortunate to be influenced by creative, imaginative mentors in my life, especially teachers who weren't afraid to speak up, question authority, take risks, and push me to dig deep. And this led me into teaching and the meaningful work that comes with building community and connecting children to the natural world. When we started in the 1990s, the environmental middle school, we had this dream of creating a microcosm of the greater world and how we would like to see it, bringing together youth from all over the city to work and to play and to learn together. If I get to know you and the place you come from, I will care about you and your family and your neighborhood as my own. And in a very real way, that is what this film is about. It's about our undeniable connections. We see and we hear the stories of people on the ground fighting for environmental justice. And we understand how we are all related and the power that comes with this realization. It's this power that leads me to act. And the years of working for change side by side with youth has given me the courage. And I know that this film will also lead many, many youth to act. Necessary. One thing I've always believed is that true service learning is grounded in curriculum. We learn about an issue, we connect with the people who are living it, and we work together to create change. It's not about assigning students to go out and do something. It's about learning side by side with them and acting with them. I've never separated my teaching from my life. It was my life, and actually it continues to be my life. And since service learning was a part of school, it was also a part of my life. An example of this is if students want to take action about a social or environmental justice issue in our community related to the curriculum that we've been studying, we invite community members who are impacted and knowledgeable to talk about it, and if possible, take students to the place to see firsthand what's happening. We listen and learn how we can best support and further the work that's already being done. If it means testifying, and well, then I would testify too, just like I would give feedback to my students on their testimony. I would ask students to give me feedback on my testimony. Teaching is a partnership. It's a collaboration with students. And as we learn, we grow and mourn and celebrate together. We are role models for each other. And really, truly, it's no different with activists. 30 years of teaching for me has been 30 years of activism. So when I retired, direct action seemed like the natural course of evolution or development. It was and is my moral and ethical responsibility to risk arrest if need be. When we became aware of the number of oil trains at Zenith and the inability of the city to take action, I knew that I would at some point risk arrest to stop them. What I learned from getting arrested in Anacortes at Break Free from Fossil Fuel Action in May of 2016, the year after my retirement, was the importance of having a legal strategy in order to educate others about the risks and need for action, and hopefully set some kind of legal precedent in these kinds of cases. As a teacher and an activist, I'm aware that I am just one person. I don't know a lot, and I don't have to know everything, thank goodness. But I do know that I trust myself to learn, and I trust the community of activists, teachers, students, families to support one another in the process of learning together and fighting for justice. And this film captures that so deeply. Our learning curve is huge. A colleague of mine that I worked with for many years had a huge banner in his classroom that said, "Real learning is messy." And I couldn't agree more. And I would add that real activism is messy too. In 26, and there's no end to the work that we have to do. And I'd like to mention a couple of things that are happening right now in Portland. In 2016, teachers and students and community members brought a climate justice education resolution to Portland Public Schools. And the school board, we took it to the school board where they unanimously approved it. Well, I think we all know that resolutions and implementation are two very, very different things. It wasn't until students held a sit-in and rallied and demanded that the district act on the resolution that the district finally budged to make some visible changes in regards to climate education. As a member of the Portland Public Schools Climate Justice Committee, this continues to be a struggle. For the past 2 years, committee members and the Eco School Network have worked to develop a draft climate crisis response policy for the biggest property owner in the city, with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving the health and wellness of school communities, and centering educational values of racial and equity and climate justice. Well, based on feedback from the community outreach, there was not only 100% support for the policy, but community members asked for it to be even stronger. Unfortunately, the response from the district was to disregard the results of the community engagement process and significantly weaken the policy. One example, our district refuses to divest from fossil fuels. Superintendent Guerrero, according to Portland Public Schools, has been a vocal proponent for climate justice and student voice. Yet what the district fails to realize is that teachers And students and community members want authentic climate action, not lip service. Once again, we're going to need to mobilize to push back and demand that Portland Public Schools leads by example and embraces the kind of climate policy that our children and communities deserve. Unfortunately, you know, the district is more concerned about what it would look like if they didn't meet their goals than taking on the challenge. And this sends a clear message to our, what their priorities are for our youth. And the youth will rise up, I'm sure. And watching this film gives that impetus to do that even more so. I'm also working with the Braided River Campaign. We're a group of community members who live and work and are connected to the Willamette River. And we are all deeply connected to the Willamette River, even though we've been cut off from it. And we're organizing for a paradigm shift in the future of the North Reach of the Willamette, also known as the Portland Harbor, where Zenith Energy sits. Many folks aren't aware that this stretch of the river is where over 90% of the fossil fuels for the state of Oregon are stored in old tanks on infill on top of the Portland fault line. And we're working to break the cycle of economic planning, which continues the narrative that there are not enough acres of industrial land, and therefore we need more polluting industry. Instead, we are asking the city to invest in a green working waterfront, which includes habitat restoration, river access for communities, retrofitting and deconstructing of fossil fuel storage facilities like Zenith, protection for small businesses, worker services, clean energy manufacturing, trade, safe jobs, and full Superfund cleanup with community benefits. As part of the work, we've created a gallery at the Lytton Community Center that honors the history of the Willamette River communities and envisions a different path forward. We hope you can come and visit that gallery, because at the gallery, it also tells the story and these stories that are so important. We all know that industry has the ears of the city and state officials, and because of this influenced decision-making policy. But this film demonstrates that collectively, we are a hell of a lot louder. We have the right to clean air, to clean water, to clean land, to a livable planet, and our children do too. It's obvious that we cannot wait for world leaders to lead, so we have to lead. As Andreas Malm, a Swedish author, states in his opinion piece, The Moral Case for Destroying Fossil Fuel Infrastructure, if someone has planted a time bomb in your home, you are entitled to dismantle it. The same applies to our planet. So I'm excited to do this work with you. And thank you, Jan, for this film and including me in it. I feel so honored.
Wow, Jan, thank you for sharing your experience. Thank all of you. I'm trying not to get too emotional. It's so inspiring. And I keep saying that, but it's just a reminder of what a powerful thing it is. I know that a lot of us see ourselves as just ordinary people. And I think it's just so, I don't know, it's really special when folks, really are inspired to step up. And, your role as a lifetime educator is so important. The motivation to protect things for future generations. And you talk about choosing teaching as your weapon. And I just think that's so important. And, as you know, my mom's also an educator and I've had the pleasure of seeing you two both together as activists, standing up as the generation before me leading the way, and so many other folks and all the folks on this panel. It just is, it's just really so wonderful to see that, what we can accomplish when we come together and are determined to protect one another and our planet. And I'm so inspired by all of you here. I know that folks who are watching are feeling really inspired. And, you know, there's this part in the film where Mike Horner talks about, you know, this is going to take a lot of courage, and hope is really important and wonderful. But I think courage is really what can drive us forward in times of despair. And I know that I feel a lot more courageous fighting alongside all of you and folks in this movement. And it just gives me so much hope moving forward. So thank you all again for this really important work, and for Jan, your powerful storytelling skills that will continue to serve as an educational tool and an inspiration for folks as we spread the word. So everybody make sure to tell your friends what a great film it is. There's going to be other screenings coming up. And again, yes, thank you so much. I want to make sure folks have time to ask some questions. So now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of the evening. We have about 20-25 minutes to answer questions. I know there's a lot of folks on tonight who might have questions for the panelists. So we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can, and try to get back to you if we miss them. But let's use the chat function to put our questions in for the panelists. You can specify if it's for a specific panelist, or if you want to just open it up to everyone, you don't have to specify that. But yeah, another reminder too, there's a lot of important links. I'll put them in there again, so they're not lost in the chat for folks to check out. And I'll give folks just a second here to start putting their questions in. I do want to start with a question for Cathy. And the question is there anything that folks can do to support the work that the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla are doing? I know that there's a lot of work going on, and a lot of it we invite folks into. You know, we ask a lot from you, and there's a question about what folks can do to help support anything for CTUIR.
Well, this is Cathy. I'm not a governing elected official. I'm, you know, Kathla and Allah to many, but I do know that I was on a tribal council meeting today through Zoom, and it appears that, of course, there's always the literally hot topic issue of Hanford and the Columbia generating station that's right across the river that affects so many of us. And you can go to columbiariverkeeper.org for that information, more so than my tribal website. And then the kind of overarching frack gas that has affected all of us. I think you put that link in there as well, that we oppose both of these, the tribe in whole, and the development of small modular nuclear reactors that is happening, you know, down at with NuScale in Corvallis and up in Idaho. You know, now all the billionaires are jumping on the bandwagon, and I don't recall the exact link, but Biden is, you know, looking at, you know, putting how many gazillion dollars into this, and, you know, spouting on one side of his mouth that, you know, he's the Green New Deal president, but then doing development on SMNRs and subsidizing frack gas. So we've really got to kind of look at it not just from a tribal perspective, but from a community perspective. So that's what I would encourage people to do. At this juncture, from the meeting, the tribal council meeting today, we keep all of our families and our relatives close because of the pandemic and the Delta surge that hit. We've lost people, and that's always a major concern. The issues around our salmon and our first foods is a major concern, again, you can go on CRK's website for some of that, direct links and how to support that. One of the things that we just have to remember that we as Native people, and our allies, we don't see state boundaries like some people do. We see homelands, we see treaty lands, we see the sacred medicines, the berries, the roots, the hunting and the fishing sites. We see community. So the more that we stand together united, the more we're going to be able to accomplish and look for a sustainable, just future. Thanks, Kate. Thanks for the question.
Thanks so much, Cathy. I am also getting a little note that some folks are having a little bit of trouble with the chat. So if folks are having trouble with the chat, feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you as well and you can ask your question that way. I know it seems to be working for a couple of people and then I got a message that somebody was having trouble. So if you're having trouble, feel free to raise your hand. I see Catherine Chuddy, your hand is up. Go ahead, Catherine. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
So thank you to everyone. This was awesome. And we had difficulty with the film itself being kind of choppy when we were watching it and wondering if there's it would stop and start. Not sure whether it's just my connection, but is there going to be a time when this will be available, say on YouTube or some form of video watching for people in addition to the necessity series through the Zen education system? So, because I would just love to share this with a lot of people and I'm not sure how to do that.
Jan, I'll let you speak to that. I think that could have been a connection issue, Catherine, but Jan, do you have any feedback on when the availability might be a little more widespread there?
Yeah, I'm sorry you had that difficulty. It was likely your internet connection because at this point in our distribution process, we're not letting people download it unless they've been licensed through as educators or for screenings. So for the event tonight, I suspect people who had decent internet were able to watch it. So you might try it again. We are presenting the project to distributors for video on demand availability, but that will be probably happening next year. But in the meantime, we're hoping groups can approach us to screen it. So there are ways of licensing the film for community screenings here and other places around the country, either part 1 or part 2. So just get back to me if you have trouble and need to talk with someone about your access. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's likely it was a very popular link the last few days. So it could have been just a lot of people logging on to watch too. So thank you for that. I do see the chat's back on. So I see a question from Ella. Can you please say more about how tribal treaties preempt the railroad in Mosier? How can we work together to stop Zenith using that knowledge? And anyone want to field that? Maybe Direlle, if you have any feedback. I don't want to pick on anyone, but other folks, Lauren and others, can feel free to jump in as well. I think that this is coming from a place of the railroads being kind of a difficult entity to regulate in terms of a lot of the ways we traditionally kind of, move through these fights and look at different ways to intervene. So I think these railroads sometimes seem like a bit of an obstacle. And I think maybe Ella wants to hear more about how the existence of tribal treaties that were there long before the railroads, how that can play into this story.
I will take
This is Cathy.
Oh, go ahead, Cathy.
I'm going to just take a short clip, and I'm going to let you finish up for me, Direlle.
Okay.
So Mosier, because of the way it sits along the river, there are 4 treaty tribes that are part of that sacred area. It's our tribe, the Umatilla, the Waluulapum, all the Yakima bands in Washington, Direlle's homelands down the Wasco, Warm Springs, Paiutes, and up towards Nimipoos in Nez Perce country. You know, the irony around Mosier really was that nobody really wanted to put their sovereign rights on the line for quite a while. The attorneys were going back and forth, from what I understand. I sat with my good friend Dan Sears in that meeting before the sitting council. I can't remember the exact name of them, for Wasco County. And I was the only tribal person there, and I was an elected official, so I had to wait till the very end. But all those shiny shoes guys were all decked out in the front, and they came to ram railroad philosophies right down through everybody's, they did not care. They did not care. All I had was a small, I'd come from berry picking from across Huckleberry Heaven. And I brought that little dish of berries up to get them to try to understand where they were and how this living being that we know is so sacred, what this means to us. And it was, I could have just been talking to a wall, because they were there to do their job, their bidding, and the railroad has always been that way. So in closing, you just have to remember, treaties were not a peaceful signing. Our people died. Our people were abused. So once those treaties were negotiated and signed, we hold them very dear, and we're very careful about when we put those sovereign rights on the line. So there is no, where Zenith is, there are ancestral homelands there, but there is no treaty land there. So Direlle, I'm going to let you kind of finish that up, but it gets kind of emotional for me, because we are such a sovereign people that has fought for this land and died for this land and carry on for it for so long. Go ahead, Direlle.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Cathy, you framed it so well from a personal perspective. And when I think about the words that you're given, or that you shared, I can only think back to the time when our ancestors were sitting down at those treaty councils, and those that are attorneys know what makes a valid contract. And our people were under duress, we were facing disease, relocation, war, encroachment from the railroads, this nation building and expansion and manifest destiny. Our populations had been decimated in tribal communities by almost 90%, if not more in some tribal communities. So all of that coming at us. And then, anchoring treaties, within this body and history of nation building that the United States was engaging in at the time that the railroads really started to take hold with regard to their lobbying and their building of infrastructure, was running right up against what this era right after this treaty making era. And so, as Cathy mentioned, that our people put their hearts and minds and souls into those treaty councils to try to think about what's going to be there for the next 7 14 generations to come. That's a lot of responsibility for one generation sitting around a treaty making table. And they've put together, again, those core principles that I mentioned earlier were carried into those treaties. And mind you, a lot of our people, English was not their first language. So my husband always says English was made for lying. And so that's because there's a lot of distrust there. And so when you mention that, you know, tribes have very senior rights when it comes to land and water. Many of it predates the states of the Pacific Northwest. Definitely our 1855 treaties predate the states of Oregon and Washington. So again, those notions of state boundaries are quite irrelevant to us, if not to the case of international boundaries. Those all came long after we as Indigenous people, you know, took hold in this land, again, since time immemorial and for countless generations. So I just kind of think about, you know, all of those things, and then we carry those forward. We also carry that responsibility. And what we do is, you know, I think at this point in time, are looking for allies, people to understand and to help us. And I always use the canoe analogy that we're not looking for our allies to be leading the canoe or skippering the canoe, but sometimes we need your muscle power to help us lift that canoe offshore and get it on the water. Every once in a while, we might want to put you into the canoe to help give us some of that momentum and muscle power, but really helping elevate our ability to know what's going on. Because as Cathy mentioned, I'm not a tribal leader myself. I work with tribes, tribal governments, and tribal leaders, informing them on these issues. But there a lot of times, many of our tribal leaders are spread very thin on everything from healthcare to infrastructure. And so trying to ensure that, one, we have some of those allies recognizing the absence of our voice in some of these forums and tables, and recognizing that that absence sometimes is calling attention to why are the tribes not here, because they should be here, are some of those opportunities. And I think the other piece is just, cultivating those relationships and building that sense of trust. So those are some of the thoughts that I have with regard to thinking about treaties and how that can all kind of play a role in all this.
Yeah, and I, excuse me, I was hoping to add to that what Cathy and Direlle just mentioned, because, you know, right now we are kind of up to our eyeballs with the resistance to Line 3 and the Enbridge pipeline going through the Anishinaabe territories in northern Minnesota and heading into Wisconsin and Michigan. Over 900 people were arrested resisting that pipeline in less than a year. And those cases are continuing to wind their way through an overloaded tiny court system in northern Minnesota that's also being impacted by COVID. But one of the advances that we are working on at Line 3 with the Anishinaabe, which is also sort of like our next step with regard to the necessity defense, is we are putting together a cultural necessity defense for Indigenous water protectors. And the idea is talking about genocide and ecocide within Indigenous communities, not only with regard to fossil fuels, but just so many attacks on like the cultural strength of these communities, as Cathy and Direlle were mentioning. This is certainly not the first volley, you know, megaloads or nuclear reactors or coal or pipelines, you know, have just often exploited Indigenous communities, poor communities, communities of color. And so the idea is, in addition to using our climate necessity defense for Line 3, we're also going to advance that defense by adding in this Indigenous sovereignty and kind of like this cultural genocide piece with the tribe. So that will be the next chapter that will be coming down the pipeline, so to speak.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing. This is a really powerful conversation, and I think it's wonderful to help give people perspective who don't know about this. And I'm really excited to hear more about this cultural necessity defense. I think this is really important work you all are doing. So thank you. And let's see, I have another question here from Marta, saying, I was struck by the moment in the film when activists in Portland took a stand that supported the cause of folks living in rural areas upriver. I'd love to hear more about how you're envisioning bringing this film to support rural communities as an organizing tool who aren't always represented in or directly connected to urban organizing contexts. And I also see another question about often the same activists show up for a lot of these events, including the screening. And so how can we best get more people involved? So maybe we could kind of combine those two questions, both the rural areas and like bringing new folks in who, so we're not just preaching to the choir, but we actually are helping build the base of this movement further, and empowering other folks who don't have access to these tools, you know, how we can do that. So I will open this up for anyone who wants to jump in on that question about maybe Jan Haaken, you want to start about availability of the film potentially in rural areas?
Yeah, I'll have Cathy mentioned at the beginning a screening we have scheduled in early December at a school, a Native middle and high school in Pendleton, and there'll be an assignment and discussion around the screening. But you know, in a way, the rural-urban divide has been talked about for several centuries, and it's much more complex than the term itself would suggest. That rural communities are complex as are urban communities. And I remember when I interviewed you, Direlle, I said, so how do you think about bridging the so-called urban-rural divide? And you mentioned this concept of stewardship, and that many communities have ways of coming together around a kind of moral and material interest in protecting not only the resources for future generations, but fighting industries that are so aggressive and steamrolling everything in their path. And so I think as a teacher and educator, as well as a filmmaker, I'm interested in films like this, kind of opening up conversations where people find common interests. As Dan Sears said in the film, this action in Portland is also about people hundreds of miles up the river who are affected by these industries. But I'm hoping that we have the support of the community in taking the film in different areas in beyond the metro areas, and having conversations about common interests, as well as sources of conflict as well, or differences that emerge. And I think films can be helpful in that way, because people can kind of focus on this thing on the screen and then have a conversation that protects against kind of a direct confrontation. There's a story, an account that gives people something to respond to. Cathy, do you want to say more about our plans for taking the film to different communities?
Yeah, so Nechawi Community School is a charter school. It's a 4-year high school. I believe there's about 80 students there. I know my grandson's a sophomore now. My nephew's a junior. So they're not only great basketball teams, culturally aware of who they are as Native kids, and even have some non-Native kids that come out to the res to go to school. They have a a core team of teachers who are dedicated, and a school board and our tribe that puts thousands of dollars along with the Pendleton School District to fund it. And they just opened a brand new school with a new gym. The first time we've had a new gym for, oh man, probably when my father was on the Housing Authority back in the 70s. From there, we hope to have some showings in rural Eastern Oregon, where I'm from. We're working with the local climate organizers, Mary Davis and her team, to look at where else we might have some venues open that are safe during the, the COVID restrictions that we have.
Thank you, Cathy and Jan. I see that we are, I really want to, yeah, go ahead, Jan.
I was just going to add that, through the PPS Climate Justice Committee, we'll be getting this out to teachers, hopefully having a teach climate justice teaching like we did with the Necessity 1 film. And so that will really get out to the community, speaking to Rick's comment, to the greater community, to youth and to families. And then also there's a lot of faith-based organizations up and down, all over Oregon that we can reach out to. And that's a really great way to get this film out to folks that haven't seen it or wouldn't have connected here tonight.
Thank you, Jan. And I did put the link to the Necessity, the movie website in the chat, where you can request a screening and get in touch with Jan about that. Yeah, I do see that we're at time. I really am sorry to folks whose questions we didn't get to. I would love to talk to you all for longer, because I feel like this is just such a great conversation, and what a wonderful panel to have you all together here. And I see this really, really powerful thread of inspiring women who are dedicated to reducing harm and really making this planet a better place to live. And Columbia Riverkeeper has been proud to partner up on this project with the whole Necessity crew, because our work is so connected, and we feel that storytelling is such an important and powerful part of the work that we do, and being able to connect to others, and being able to be brave, and being able to move forward as we go through navigating these difficult times. I hope you all feel as inspired as I do by what we can accomplish together. And we need our tribal leaders, we need our attorneys, our teachers, our artists, our storytellers. We all have a critical role to play in this fight. And so much gratitude and appreciation to all of you here on the panel tonight, those who have attended. I just hold you all very dear, and am really inspired by what we will be able to continue to accomplish together. And it's just been a real pleasure sharing this space with you all tonight. And with that, I think we will just part ways for the rest of the evening and go be inspired about our next steps in this journey. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. Take care, everyone.